Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us this evening for RJ Julia's virtual event featuring a panel of authors from the Object Lessons series. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few quick Zoom housekeeping details. If you haven't noticed already, everyone is muted and will remain muted throughout the duration of the event. But please do ask us questions. We want to hear from you, and you can send them to us using the chat box function on your Zoom screen. We'll get to as many questions as possible later on in the evening, and RJ Julia's Mission Control is monitoring the event. So if you've got a question, just send it on over, and we will get to it later on. For optimal viewing, you can use the Zoom view functions on the top right corner of your screen, which will allow the speaking author to be highlighted throughout the event. If at any point you do experience technical difficulties, it happens. All you have to do is click the link again and you'll be readmitted. And of course, please don't forget to purchase this series of books at rjjulia.com. We will send the link over to you using that chat box function later in the evening as well. So let's dive in. Tonight, we are pleased to be joined by 4 fantastic authors and contributors to the Object Lessons series, which is published in partnership with an essay series in The Atlantic. Object Lessons brings us beautifully crafted books about the hidden lives of ordinary things, all of which start with a specific inspiration and develop original insights and lessons about the object in question. Author Erik Anderson brings us the object lesson Bird. Erik is the author of 3 previous books of fiction, including Flutter Point Essays, selected by Amy Fusselman for the 2015 Zone 3 Nonfiction Book Prize. He teaches creative writing at Franklin and Marshall College and lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Dr. Rolf Halden, author of Object Lessons Environment, is director of the Biodesign Center for Environmental Health Engineering, Biodesign Institute, professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment, and senior sustainability scientist at the Global Institute of Sustainability at Arizona State University. He serves on the expert team of the American Chemical Society briefing decision makers at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, at the Food and Drug Administration, the National Academies, and members of U.S. Congress on issues pertaining to environmental health and sustainability. Dinah Lenney is the author of Object Lessons Coffee. She is a member of the core faculty of the Bennington Writing Seminars and the author or editor of 4 books, including The Object Parade. Her essays and reviews have been published in the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, among other publications. And last but certainly not least, author Steve Mentz brings us Object Lessons Ocean. Steve is professor of English at St. John's University. He is author of 3 books, including Shipwreck Modernity, Ecologies of Globalization, and the editor of 4 books. His maritime research has been supported by the Folger Shakespeare Library, the John Carter Brown Library, Mystic Seaport, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Maritime Museum in London. Steve actually coordinated the panel for us this evening, so thank you very much to Steve and these authors for joining us tonight. Without further ado, please welcome Steve Mentz.
Thanks so much. It's really such a pleasure to be here in this virtual space. I actually am particularly pleased and excited to be virtually at RJ Julia. For me, this is a little bit of a local as well as a cyberspace event. I live down the Connecticut shoreline from RJ Julia. I have been to the store many times over the years. And in fact, when we get to my reading at the end of our little sequence, I'll talk a little bit about the presence of our local ocean here on Long Island Sound. But it is a particular pleasure to be gathering virtually together with everyone, and also to be doing it through the auspices of a place that I really love and admire in the part of the world where I live. So we will go through the 4 of us and read short selections from our short books. We'll then have some discussion among ourselves, and then there'll be time for questions from the audience. So please, if you think of anything, just post it up on the chat, and the tech wizards will make all the questions happen at the appropriate time. But so I think we're going to start with Erik and Bird.
Sounds good. I will. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through? Okay, good. So I am going to read, I just say a couple of words about the structure of the book. Dinah and Steve have already heard me give this spiel, but I'll make it very quick. Basically, the Bird book is divided into these kind of alternating sections between sort of narrative nonfiction, long-form journalism, and then these shorter little self-contained units that kind of mimic a bird field guide. And I'll be reading one of those tonight. And before I do read, I just want to say thanks to RJ Julia, everybody at RJ Julia, for hosting us tonight. This is a great opportunity for us to gather and virtually launch our books out into the world, since we can't physically do it. So I'm going to read Dusky Seaside Sparrow, M.O. Dramas, Maritimus nigrescens. The dusky was a fuscous little bird with an extremely limited range. It lived past tense within 10 square miles of Titusville, Florida, otherwise known as Space City. It was an idyllic spot for the duskies, full of salt marshes and cordgrass. But beginning in the 1950s, as NASA took root nearby and the human population soared, the birds' numbers declined. People had always considered the area a backwater, so overrun by mosquitoes, it was practically uninhabitable. But then the marshes were drained or impounded, and the local watershed was transformed by urban and agricultural growth. DDT took care of the rest. During the year of the first manned spaceflight, 1968, there were close to 2,000 duskies living near the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral. But by the time the Challenger disintegrated 73 seconds into its flight in early 1986, there was just a single dusky left. Orange Band, as the bird was unfortunately known on account of the tracking ring around one of its legs, was slightly fat, blind in one eye, and exhibiting signs of gout. He was living out what remained of the long life of his species, perversely, it now seems, as part of an attraction called Discovery Island at Disney World, which had agreed to take in the beleaguered bird, generously hosting a costly and ineffective breeding program whose chief success before throwing in the towel was to produce a bird, as the New York Times reported, that was 87.5% dusky. Just moments away from the mainland by motor launch reads one old brochure. Discovery Island is a fascinating kingdom where nature reigns and you are its honored guest. Or so Disney wanted its visitors to believe, until the company abandoned the island in late 1999, having relocated the remaining animals either to another part of the resort or to nearby zoos. At that point, it had been more than a decade since Orange Band had died, but it would be another decade before the space shuttle program, having achieved its aims, was finally discontinued, albeit too late for the sparrow. These days, Discovery Island is more or less inaccessible, although for some reason, maybe to give the illusion of activity or more fancifully as a tribute to the Duskie's demise, Disney keeps the dock lights on. Thank you.
Thank you, Erik. It's a wonderful day to be thinking about the space launches from Florida, of course. Rolf?
Yeah, hello everybody.
Pass to you.
Yeah, so it's great to be here. It's a real pleasure. My book is about the environment, and I think people have taken note of the environment in the past few months, haven't we all? Hasn't it all changed our behavior? That, of course, was not the case when I wrote the book. And it's interesting. In the book, I touch on it's really a love story with the environment and also with chemistry. Probably a discipline that few people appreciate, but that dictates our health, how we feel, just about everything, and even what we look like, how old we get, and so forth. And so I wrote a book about the environment. I thought nobody cares about the environment, and now you can't escape news about the environment. So times have changed quickly. Let me read you two short passages, and then I'll hand it over. So the first one, so I run an analytical laboratory here at Arizona State University, and we got a really unusual sample that we got to analyze. And this is what this short paragraph is about. In 2012, our research team was curious to find out how the analysis of environmental samples from that small bubble, the International Space Station, could shed light on the sustainability of our species here on Earth. We thought that looking at Earth from afar would lend an insightful perspective on our chemistry and our doings. I had analyzed tens of thousands of environmental samples before, but this one was special, precious, maybe even priceless. This cluster of water molecules had traveled far and fast all the way from the International Space Station, moving at 17,000 miles per hour around a blue bubble suspended by gravity in a vacuum of nothingness, orbiting humanity for several years, and in this time span, passing through the bodies of the co-ed crew, one by one, through all of them, over and over, until its recent return to Earth and its delivery to my university laboratory in a plastic bottle. What would we find in these 3 precious liquid ounces of well-traveled space water, of recycled dinosaur piss that ejected into space aboard a tin can, became drinking water, became astronaut, became male, became female, became dirty and clean before finally returning to a spaceship much bigger than the vessel we see when we look in the mirror, much bigger than the space shuttle and the International Space Station, this spaceship we call Earth. What would our analytical measurements teach us about the astronauts' exposure to chemicals in space in their engineered life support bubble? And what would it teach us about ours here on Earth? A lot. We found a contaminated soup, thick with persistent synthetic chemicals dreamed up by humanity. We found evidence of a new epoch we are ill prepared for, the Anthropocene. The United States National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, and its contractor requested our team not to make public what we found in the space water. But it won't remain a secret much longer. Too much evidence is lurking in too many places, without and within us. To see what's in hiding, let's focus back on our home bubble, planet Earth. So there's a little story about analyzing water, and hopefully there's a little suspense injected here that makes you read the other chapters. I'd like to move on. So that the space water arrived from outer space in a plastic bottle. And plastic is an interesting material that is featured on the cover of the book. But it's obviously in a material that we can't get away from. So here's a short passage on plastics. Today's plastics are an anachronism. Many were discovered by happenstance, and they were never designed for mass production and recycling. In other words, plastics are an ongoing accident causing damage of global proportions. The impacts on human health are multifaceted and are still emerging. I found plastics intriguing because these materials represent one of the few types of pollutants that are easily discernible with the naked eye. Plastic pollution is ubiquitous, observable, and ugly. It can serve to teach us something about our relationship with the environment and the products we consume. Walk along a river and you see plastic trash protruding from river sediments, floating in the water and hanging from branches of trees on the riverbank, hinting at the high water line set during flooding. Go beneath the water surface and you can be sure there are more plastics there. Plastic bags, plastic cigarette filters, plastic wraps, plastic bottles, plastic clothing, plastic fishing line, and so on. Today, just about everything is made from plastics, despite the fact that these materials have no end-of-life strategy. Each year, humanity produces and releases into the environment over 300 million tons of a material that has nowhere to go and cannot be degraded effectively by microorganisms. And so my book examines a lot of the chemistry and the things that are in the environment and that linger there because they are very poorly designed. And the book tells also a story about how we can examine water to learn about our health, particularly wastewater, which is a composite of urine and stool, so biospecimens that have a lot of medical diagnostic value. And interestingly, maybe the final thought here is that in the book, I told the story of how we can use wastewater to study health in real time. And I describe how we can even discover viruses. And you wouldn't believe it, here we are a little later after the book is in print. We are in an epidemic caused by a virus, and our lab is working around the clock to measure this virus in cities around the world and in multiple locations in the United States to help people understand what their threat level is and what we can do. So the environment is king, and it's worthwhile to read, I think, and our consideration. Thank you.
Yay.
Excellent. Yes, that was fantastic. I was just reading about they've just released a study of wastewater in New Haven, Connecticut, right near me, that is exactly modeled the spread of the coronavirus also. So anyway, Dinah, you're up next.
I'm Dinah. Rolf, thank you for your work. I think we're all grateful for it, and I'm grateful to be with all of you today. And thank you to RJ, Julia, and it's just such a pleasure to be with my fellow object. Somebody called you my object lessons brothers and sisters. So here I am with the brothers. Okay, so this is from Coffee. This is early on in the book, and this is the only place in the book where I'm using third person. So I'm going to tell you a little story. This is called, the name of the chapter is called Coffee Milk. It begins with an epigraph. Coffee is your ally, Honoré de Balzac. The little girl doesn't know what the lemon is for, or how the mother, the beautiful mother, pale skin, black hair, high bones, sure fingers, see how they twist the peel just so, can drink what looks like oily ink with a layer on top of yellow-brown goo, though she does love the tiny cup in its saucer. And her mother, she loves her beautiful mother, the most beautiful grown-up in the world. She will grow up to be just like her. She can hardly wait. She'll have little china cups and fish forks and butter knives and bath oil and eyeliner and sheer hose and drippy earrings, and at dinner parties, all dressed up with her hair in a twist, she'll decorate her tiny cup of coffee with a perfect yellow curl. Sidebar. Most of this never happens, although she does acquire butter knives, but never once in the ensuing 5+ decades has she ordered a Cafe Romano. That's an espresso with shaving of lemon. For now, the little girl occasionally drinks coffee milk, a tall glass of skim with room for a ½ inch of coffee and a teaspoon of sugar, the only way she can get it down, which she is told she must do, otherwise she won't grow. But she only gets to have this delight every 3rd or 4th day. If she drinks too much coffee, the mother explains, it will stunt her growth. Stunt, such a terrifying word. Even so, she hates the milk all by itself, still true. When she isn't permitted just that little bit of coffee, what does she do? She waits her mother out. Every morning, the mother exits the kitchen, crossword puzzle in hand, to run a bath. Then she pours the whole glass down the sink. "Did you drink your milk?" calls her mother from the tub. She shouts back that she did. But not so. She has never had a full glass of milk in her life, not that she remembers, and look, she grew anyway. She thought she might never stop growing. It was awful to be so tall, except she did get to play the male leads at Wakila Camp for Girls. And eventually her mother got wise, stopped pushing the milk, let her have as much coffee as she pleased. Finally, at 5 feet 8 inches, not so towering, though on family vacations her cousins called her Wilt for Chamberlain, which was horrible, she was done. What she now knows, those cousins, grown men on the short side, were jealous even then. Also, coffee doesn't stunt anything. File that one under coffee myths. Whereas to be filed under truths, if not exactly facts, even espresso doesn't have to be bitter. It shouldn't need that shaving of lemon or sugar or milk. However, subjectively speaking, everything that is worthwhile is to some extent subjective, said Nabokov. If coffee makes milk less disgusting, milk, as disgusting as it is, makes most things more delicious, especially coffee. Although I can't believe I got through that without freezing, too. I'd like to say that. Thanks to the internet, thanks to Zoom.
Yes, that's a great passage. I love that passage. Thank you. So it's my turn. I'm going to talk here briefly about this book, Ocean, this little ocean that I can carry around in my pocket. And it's also, because it is late May on the Connecticut shoreline, it is for me a kind of season of returning physically to the ocean. The water temperature around here now is in the high 50s, and that is warm enough for me and for some of my neighbors to start swimming every day again. And so this is a moment of transition. And in this moment of transition, I spend a lot of time thinking about one particular poem. That's also a poem that I write about in a section of this book. It's a poem by Emily Dickinson, who isn't necessarily everybody's immediate choice of an oceanic writer, although I think she's a particularly great writer about the ocean. And I chose in this book to give her a pride of place instead of, I don't know, Melville or Byron or someone like that. And so this is the Dickinson poem that I murmur to myself every year when I dive into the cold water for the first time in the spring. And then I'll read you a little bit of what I have to say about this poem and about Emily Dickinson's relationship with the ocean in the chapter. So here's the poem, which is very short. Exultation is the going of an inland soul to sea, past the houses, past the headlands, into deep eternity. Bred as we among the mountains, can the sailor understand the divine intoxication of the first league out from land. So that's Dickinson's short poem. And then here is just the concluding page or so of the chapter that I wrote about Dickinson's relationship with the sea. And here I'm trying to sort of I'm trying to summarize, I suppose, or come to terms with, assess in a general sense, what this particular 19th century poet might have to say to the ocean in the largest and vastest sense. So here's what I wrote. It's possible to interpret Emily Dickinson's fascination with the sea in two distinct but complementary ways.
All right, looks like we're having some technical difficulties here. Steve will probably jump back on momentarily. Is he coming back on now?
No, yeah, this happened once earlier. He froze and then he re-entered the waiting room and I readmitted him. So I think he knows what happens. He's probably in the process of hopping onto a different browser, and I'll let him back in. But in the interim, why don't we, wait, did someone just come? No, okay, I think he left. Oh, here he is. Right. So we can just pick back up where we left off.
Hi, Steve.
Just give your audio a second. All right, there you go.
I had the feeling, Dinah, when you said that you made it through without crashing, that was it for me.
I want to just, yeah, I want to thank you for making me feel comfortable if it happens to me. Thank you. That was so gracious of you.
All right. Back to Dickinson. Dickinson wrote in 19th century America, and her era witnessed the most dramatic increase in ocean-borne travel in human history. Like Herman Melville, Lord Byron, and Jane Austen, she registered the rise of transoceanic shipping in her art. Like many other poets of the Romantic era, Dickinson found in the inhuman vastness of the sea both an apt metaphor for the transcendent imagination and also a technical challenge for lyric poetry. The sea became the world during Romanticism, and it's a core story for her also. But I also like to think that Emily Dickinson loved the sea for everything that it was not Amherst, not human, not present to her daily labors. Its alien waters confronted her at every turn with counterpoint, opposition, inaccessibility. I like to think that poetic art gets made through the encounter of ambition and impossibility. Her sea was world and also negation, presence and absence both, alien and core together. I value Dickinson's oceanic poetry as environmental art, describing the mismatches and half glimpses through which humans live in our more than human world. But then I'm the sort of person who murmurs lines of Emily Dickinson's poetry to himself every spring when I dive for the first time of the season into too cold salt water. So did I keep the audio for that?
You did?
You did. It was beautiful. You did.
Right.
Bravo.
Thanks. Sorry about that. I got kicked out by my own browser, I think, in the middle there. But so what I thought we might do before throwing it open to questions from the audience is the question that I've been thinking about as I have been, react in a relationship with this book now as a completed object is how for each of us has the relationship between the author and the object that you.
Oh no.
So I know that Steve wanted to ask this question about how the relationship between the object and the author has changed after writing your books, which I think is a fantastic and interesting question, which we would all be anxious to hear your answers to. Dinah, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll jump in to say that I actually can now drink black coffee, which was not true when I wrote that little sequence. I wrote that little section early on, and I was devoted to milk in my coffee. Now I drink much better coffee than I used to, and it is delicious, and I love it black. I also love it with milk. I mean, make no mistake, I love my coffee with milk, but my appreciation of coffee has changed. So, I think when I started writing the book, I intended to write about what coffee was for me emotionally and what it called up for me in terms of associations. And maybe I didn't know, definitely I didn't know how important coffee was in and of itself, in terms of the way it's produced and the taste. And, we just drink much better coffee now.
A lot of people say that there's no life before coffee, and most days that's true for me too.
Yeah, well, and that was always true for me, that I always wanted my coffee. I didn't know that I wanted it to be delicious, though, and now I really do. Now I want it to be delicious, unless it's room service coffee, and then I don't care how it tastes. I'm so delighted that somebody else brought it to me, and that's very exciting. But yeah.
I have to say your book made me a little ashamed that each week we buy the same kind of coffee. It's like I really need to expand my palate and maybe take.
That feels, I think, Eric, that feels, other people should talk here, but just to say, I thought it was a sign of kind of being grown up, that you knew what kind of coffee you liked, so you bought the same brand all the time, and that was somehow an adult thing to do. It's not the case. No. Okay. So anyway, what about you guys? How did your relationships change?
Rob?
I'm gone.
Oh, no, you're there, Dinah.
Oh, I'm there.
Yeah, I can go next. So to me, I started out as a microbiologist in my training. I love biology. I love the great outdoors and life, and studied that. But there was no living to be made, so I had to become an engineer in order to put the food on the table. So I always had an appreciation for the environment. But it's interesting to see now how much the relationship of all of us is changing during this pandemic, how we consider everything we do. And it was very difficult to communicate before that we are that each of us is part of the environment, that we create each other's environment. It was because people think there's like a glass shield screen between the environment and us, and we are different from the environment. But no, we are exuding chemicals, and we are taking up chemicals like a sponge all the time. And that was a difficult concept, which is now kind of obvious, and we're all scared. But I think if I have only a minute to say something here, I don't want you to be scared. And so, you know, even with the virus, as bad as it is, it's important to just, you know, be rational about things. And so you're better off outdoors than indoors. And your biggest threat is droplets in the air. It's not, you know, the fomites. It's not the little speck that's somewhere, you know, unidentified stain on your coffee table. Most likely will not infect and kill you. It is more the proximity to other people and speaking and even singing. And I play in a band, so that's bad. So we practice outdoors now. But it's really avoiding the droplets that have a heavy load of viruses that then get planted in your lung and might make you sick. And if you avoid those, then don't be scared of all the objects. I mean, you know, conduct yourself with caution. But it's not healthy to be too afraid. And so hopefully we can, you know, as we look at our environment and form our environment, we remember that you know, our days are counted and we got to enjoy them, whether there's a pandemic or not. And let's be smart about it. And there's still lots to be enjoyed, like very cold water. I admire you for entering the vastness of the ocean at that temperature. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I love, I mean, one of the things that I loved about reading your book, Rolf, is the wonderful precision. You described, I think when you were doing your introduction, you said that your book is a love story with chemistry, and the wonderful precision with which you describe the physical relationship between plastic and water and human bodies and other chemicals in the environment. I mean, I love yeah, I mean, in my world, in the world of literary theory, we spend a lot of time thinking about the relationship between insides and outsides and the distinction between bodies and environments. But there's this incredible material precision. I think of it in relation to Dinah's comment too, about like coffee as a technical process. Coffee is like making coffee in the morning is as close as I come to high school chemistry lab. I know you come much closer in a much more sophisticated way, the laboratory techniques, but you know, my ChemX thing sort of looks a little bit like a bit of lab equipment. And so, and I'm not as precise maybe as some coffee aficionados could be, but the way in which, you know, coffee, environment, ocean, bird, these are all material pressures that have this particular sort of impress on our bodies and also on our emotions, and that overlap is so interesting.
Right.
Steve, I wanted to ask you something about your book. I want to hear how your relationships changed with birds and with the ocean, but one of the things that I love about ocean is the way it incorporates poetry and theater and swimming. I mean, it's vast. It's a vast little book, and I was interested in your decision, on top of all of that, to have it illustrated, because the illustrations are beautiful, and they made me wish. You know, I do a lot of describing. Somebody did.
Okay. Well, so I can tell the story of the illustrations because they actually are really sort of.
Oh no.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, Erik, do you want to talk a little bit?
Sure. I was going to say, Dinah, that I had long planned to have illustrations in Bird, because it's a bird book. You have to have illustrations or images. Maybe we talked about this before, in fact.
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't. Yeah, but in the end,
we didn't.
And at one point, you know, I was sort of collaborating with a friend, an artist that I know, and she was doing some illustrations for the book. And then in the end, I decided not to include them. For some reason, it just felt better not to have them, not to have the book be illustrated. Maybe because birds are so visual, maybe because I do, you know, there's so much descriptive work in talking about them anyway, that I wanted to take that away from the reader in a way and focus a little more on the text. But I, you know, I'll just say very briefly about how my relationship changed to birds. And, you know, that I think when I went into it, I thought, you know, here's a subject that a group of people has a kind of monopoly over, right? Ornithologists, scientists, right? That birds belong to scientific facts in a way, right? And so part of it was I was reading a lot of scientific research about birds. And I think in the process of the book, you know, in the process of writing the book, I came to appreciate or realize or just embrace the fact that, you know, we don't have to cede scientific facts to scientific meanings, right? That we can make meaning out of science in ways that scientists wouldn't make meaning out of it, which is very different than saying, you know, as a birder, I'm not a birder, but a birder who says I have a particular enthusiasm for birds. That's a different kind of meaning making than the meaning making I'm talking about. And yeah, and I think that changed for me over the course of writing it, for sure.
All right, great. Well, I want to just field some questions that we're getting from our audience here. Dinah, this one's for you. Can you talk a little bit about your research process? Oh, is she frozen? All right. Well, how about Rolf? Can you talk a little bit, or Erik, about your research process throughout making and coming together with the Object Lesson series books?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a researcher, so I have a lot of baggage that I can, you know, get out there. For me, the question was more, how do I communicate it? And I often feel that as scientists, we are so constrained because we have to be so precise, and we have to do things just in a certain way that is very ritualized and doesn't leave a lot of way for creativity. So I really embrace the idea of writing in a voice that could be new and very different from the scientific writing that I do. I also like the idea of illustrations. I hope this can be seen. So I had a very talented person. Can you see this?
Yeah.
So every chapter, this is from Griffin Finke, a high school student who made an illustration for every chapter of my book, which I meant to include, but I guess the production cost got in the way. And so here they are, the beautiful drawings. And so I like the crossover of different methods of engaging people. Obviously, you can, you know, talk in different voices. You can have different people report and so forth. But I think I just enjoy the multimedia and the new experiences, just like this book readings. So it's enriching, and you never quite know what you get yourself into, but it sure is a pleasure.
Do you ever find yourself feeling like you're going down a black hole of information and you just have to stop yourself and get back on track back to the writing? I mean, start to finish, I know the process must take quite a bit of time because you do pour a lot of research into the end result here.
Yeah, I think I would just say I think that's absolutely true. That part of research is you gather and you gather and you gather, and you know, eventually you're sitting on this big, you know, pile of research, and you know, you have to sort of sift through and figure out, you know, what can I use, what do I need to discard. You know, at some point you have to stop gathering and start writing. Some people, I think, write as they gather, but yeah, I think there's a kind of critical mass that you reach with some of these things. And we talked about this, Steve and Dinah and I have talked about this, but, you know, this sense that Samuel Beckett has of, in art, you make a mess and then you clean it up. You know, like there's a lot of, you know, that's research too. In research, you gather a lot of material and then you have to sort of, you know, start pruning it.
So interesting. Steve, question for you. If given the choice, would you be a merman for a day, and what would you do?
Oh, I would definitely do that if I were given the choice. What would I do? I would go in the water. I mean, I guess there would be a question of location, right? Because like part of the I mean, part of the thing about the sea is that I can walk down the street here in Connecticut and be in the same ocean as the Mediterranean and the Caribbean and the South Seas and Tahiti. But, you know, there are elements of, you know, local elements to different oceans that are also particularly, you know, enthralling. There are lots of places that I've not yet been swimming that I would like to go, like Tahiti, or, you know, some other, you know, the northern part of the Great Barrier Reef, where it's still relatively healthy. But I think the other thing about being a merman is you get to go deep. I mean, one of the things about being a human, even a human who sometimes uses things like snorkels and scuba gear, is that we're basically constricted to the very top, you know, even the top, you know, 100 feet or 150 feet of the water, which is about as deep. I mean, I don't think I've even ever been 150 feet deep with scuba gear. But if I was really a merman, I could go 1,000 feet. I mean, it would be dark down there. But there's all sorts of stuff to see in the deep ocean. And I think a lot about the, so much of the human exploration of the ocean is either just at the moment where the air meets the water, or just a little bit below or a little bit above that, right? The, you know, the distance that a human can sort of comfortably travel. And underneath, there's all this depth, which is so poorly understood. And that's where I would go.
Let your fins take you away.
Exactly.
We have another question here, and this is for no one in particular. If you were to reevaluate your object, is there anything you would approach differently in your research, your writing, the presentation of your work now that it's finished?
You know, I think I said that that if I were, my circumstances were different, if I wasn't a working person, if I had the time and the resources, I think I would have traveled. I traveled a little bit for this book, you know, to New York and to Berkeley. And I think, and to Goleta, where there's actually a coffee farm. But I think that if I'd had the wherewithal, I would have traveled to, you know, South America, to India, to you know, to see where and how people are growing, to Ethiopia for sure, and Yemen, where it all began, to see how people are, you know, how coffee is not just a part of their daily lives that they take for granted, but actually they're living, you know, and I would have loved to have done that. That would be a very different sort of book, yes, but.
Yeah. So if you had limitless options on
exactly.
your research.
Right. And, you know, funds and, you know, time. So.
Right.
I think I would have done, I probably would have done more experiential research too, I think. I mean, I did quite a bit, but one thing I always wanted to do and never got around to was, you know, they do a Central Park birding tour, right? And I've always thought, you know, I always thought that would be a sort of interesting object lesson in and of itself for, you know, nature and humanity, right? That there are, you know, quite a few birds, obviously, to see in Central Park.
Well, for my part, I just want to thank the editors, because I made it easy. I just wrote 1.5 books, and then it was ripped into pieces and put back together, and I liked what I saw, and it was good. I had very little time. Would I do it different? I think nothing is ever done, and so I publish a lot on the site and for research papers, like hundreds of research papers. None of these is ever perfect or done, and they would, and if you do them over next week, they would be better. And so you have to kind of just let go. And I think that was an advantage I had, because I didn't have a whole lot of time. I think there was like 5 months in which I had to do this from start to finish. And so it just had to happen. I had a deadline, which deadlines are awesome. Without deadlines, the world would come to an end. And so, yeah, that just worked. But I think you can't be too self-critical, you know. And I like the process for sure. And I hope the reader gets some of that kick out of the book as well.
Yeah. How were the objects assigned to each of you, or do you approach it and come up with the idea of the object? How does that process work?
think it was
Yeah,
different for each of us.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
I proposed my object. I came to the editors and said I'd like to write an object lesson book about the ocean. I
Okay.
know that I think some of you did it differently, right? Donna, you said you had a list of possible
I
objects?
made I was familiar with the series and the books, and I had interviewed the editors, and I was working at the time as an editor for a journal, and we had reviewed some of the books. And so, am I frozen or am I?
No,
No, you're good.
Gotcha.
Am I still? Yes. So I was intrigued by the books. I'd written a book called The Object Parade, so objects were my thing. I felt like I was a shoo-in for this. Not so. It was not. That's hubris. But I pitched them a list of objects, and they picked coffee.
Okay. Rolf, this one's for you. What discovery had the strongest emotional impact on you while you were researching?
So I think the book goes over some of the experiences I had when I was a laborer. I was in construction and scaffolding, heavy industry, assembly line working, and all that kind of stuff. And I got exposed to a lot of things. And I think we have a different relationship when the exposures happen to ourselves. Somehow we put up with it and you think it's okay. But when you observe birth and when you see how many of the harmful chemicals are already present in babies at birth. And then when you measure, when we measure breast milk, and it's loaded with all kinds of, problematic chemicals, and you see that is really done without rhyme and reason. That's really kind of hurtful. That moves you at a very, basic way and fundamentally, has you question, why can we possibly do this? Something so innocent like a baby, and before they take the first breath, they are already swimming in a lot of chemicals that are very poorly designed and put together, and for some reason we just don't discontinue that. So I think those observations of seeing those peaks come out of what we call a chromatograph, right, where the chemicals one by one exit, and we assign them, give them a label and the name, and we know that they're bad, and there's just hundreds of them coming out. That's rough to watch and take in.
Yeah, it's tough to stomach, I'm sure. The more you dive in, the more you uncover, and it's not always information that you want to absorb. That's real.
Absorb is the right word.
Yeah. Erik, for you, if you could tell bird enthusiasts only one thing, what would it be?
Symbols are powerful. Symbols are useful, but they also constrain us. They limit the way that we're actually able to see things, the ways we're able to understand the world. I say that because I think for a lot of bird enthusiasts, birds are symbolic of something, about nature, about beauty. And I think we're projecting onto the natural world often when it comes to birds. And I think about the line from Proust. There's the famous line from Proust about, what's needed is new eyes, right? We don't, right? There's I can't remember the exact line, but Proust, his big argument is like, you don't need a new, you don't need a new flower. You just need to be able to see it with new eyes. And I would really disagree with that. I don't think we need new eyes. I think we just need to start using them a heck of a lot better, right? So yeah, I mean that's kind of how I would respond to bird enthusiasts. I get biophilia, like love of the natural world. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I think it's also problematic and needs to be examined.
Okay. Steve, who is your favorite sea writer?
Oh, this is such a hard question, right? I actually include a list of my top 10 at the end of the book, which I won't open the book and page through now. It's hard not to it's hard not to love Herman Melville and Moby Dick as the sort of great American sea story. I think that I really did try to make a case in this book for the value of a writer like Emily Dickinson, who isn't normally thought of as a sea adventure writer, but who has this really uncanny, I think, ability to recognize the different things that the sea can mean. And in some ways, to sort of piggyback on the question you just asked Erik, like what is the kind of thing about the ocean that we think that maybe we should think differently or unthink a little bit? As I think that there's this sense of the ocean as kind of vast and timeless and singular. And my sense is that the ocean is always in process between two things, right? I talked about this a little bit in the passage I read about Dickinson. I talked about it in like the ocean is both global and very local. It is both intimate and you can both touch it physically and also never get your arms around it. And I think that dualness in the ocean is the thing that I was working as hard as I could in this book to bring out, that it isn't simply a kind of monolithic phenomenon or structure, but it is a kind of constant invitation to think one thing and to think the opposite of that thing in tension with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Dinah, can you tell us about your best cup of coffee, the best cup of coffee you've ever had?
Oh, no, the best
No
cup
pressure.
of coffee. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the thing that's so wonderful about coffee is that you do associate it with places. So I do write about there's a chapter in the book called Coffee in Paris. And it's just, it's very simple. I'm teaching there for a month, and my husband and I go out to lunch, and we are people watching, and it's very beautiful, and the coffee never ever tasted so good as it did when it comes with a little cookie that we didn't even ask for.
Yeah.
But I think the other answer, that's in terms of duality and metaphor, that's one answer, that the best cup of coffee was that coffee in Paris. But then really what I want to say is that the best cup of coffee is the first cup of coffee that I have every morning. And the chance to start again, the chance, the idea that the whole day is in front of me and I haven't wrecked it yet. And coffee, that first cup of coffee much symbolizes that for me, and it is very delicious. So that would be my other answer.
I couldn't agree more. The sound of the coffee pot going on in the morning just is the greatest sound to wake up to.
It's very hopeful, isn't it? It's very hopeful and very comforting, that first cup of coffee.
It's a blank canvas.
Yeah, yep, exactly. Yes, agreed.
So I have one more question, and this one is for, let's see here. This one is for Rolf. What do you most greatly wish for the world to understand about our environment?
So I think we just have to appreciate the environment much more. And I think so that we have a trend that now, more people live in urban environment than in the natural environment that provides for us. But we have to remember that the people who live in cities are still being nurtured by nature, and all the agricultural products are coming from the land, right? And so one question I ask in my book is like, how can we value and protect something and honor it if we are unfamiliar with it? So if you are born in a mega city in South America, right, Sao Paulo or something, and you never get out, you never see a field, and how do you appreciate nature and what it gives, and that you can't live without it? It's very difficult. And we used to have a very strong relationship to the things around us. This village, this idea of a village, right, where you know everyone and you take responsibility for your immediate neighbors. We have lost that with globalization, and I think we never really replaced the ethics that are needed. We never shifted, and so our ethical horizon ends, but our reach goes far beyond, and that creates some really adverse environmental mental and human health outcomes. And I'm struggling with that. And so it's kind of embracing the environment a little more and returning to it. And I think that's what's happening right now, thanks to the pandemic, as bad as it is. A lot of people rediscover, bike sales are through the roof. People are getting out. They want to be out there. And I hope they stay in there and stay in the environment and begin to appreciate how important it is. It's not sentimental. This is your life support system. That's what I say so often. It's like, you don't tinker with it. You don't pull out this and I can pull out this too. It still works. But that's what we're doing. It's not a good idea.
Yeah, it couldn't be more true, like you said, right now in the world. That's our silver lining. This is our awakening that we're all players in this world that we're living in, and we need to treat it right.
That's right. Have a good cup of coffee and go out there and experience.
Read your object lessons.
Yes.
Lots to be experienced.
Listen to the birds, swim in the ocean.
Nothing better. Thank you. Thank you, Erik, Rolf, Dinah, and Steve for being with us tonight. Object lessons, bird, environment, coffee, and ocean are all available for purchase at rjjulia.com. The link is available to you in your chat box on your Zoom screen. And thank you all for being with us tonight. I know it's a very strange and different world right now, but we could not be here without people like you supporting their local independent bookstores. So we thank you, and we will see you soon. Have a great night.